Do you favor a constitutional convention, and if so, why? If not, why not? Chris, we'll go right down the line. And I know you've been covering this, but in summary.
Yes, I think in summary I would say that I think that nobody disputes that this state needs serious institutional reform. You pick up the editorial pages of newspapers around the state. They're lamenting about the problems we have, the dysfunction, the governmental structures we have, the fact that nobody ever loses their seats in the legislature unless they either get convicted of a felony or resign or retire. Nobody ever gets voted out of office because they draw their own lines in a certain way. We have a judiciary that's the most complex in the country. We have 11 trial courts in New York State. California has 1 trial court. And the inefficiencies, the wastefulness, all of these issues institutionally, the relationship of the state and its local governments, things that the legislature has not meaningfully addressed in 40 years and will not address in the next 20. I think this is our only opportunity to address those issues. Certainly, there's much to like about our Constitution. I certainly, while I can understand people wanting to protect interests that are dear to them, I also think that the likelihood that you're going to have a convention that's going to be composed of New Yorkers that have overwhelmingly supported these protections and provisions and rights and things that make New York a great state, like Forever Wild, care for the needy, pension rights for public employees, and you're all of a sudden going to get a mass reaction against that when that's not even the issues people are talking about throughout the state. I just think this is our only chance to meaningfully reform the state. I'm not saying it's going to automatically work. It's a political process. I can tell you that there are a lot of differences between a convention and a legislature that I could go into if we had more time, but I'm not going to bore your viewers with. But, I think, though, that we sure know the legislature's not going to do it. So, in my opinion, this is our only opportunity to attempt to affect some of the meaningful reform that we need to make New York a better state.
And Neil, that is your worry when it comes to
our
Forever Wild.
worry is that the delegate selection process won't be any different than the kind of political forces that Chris has talked about, and that we'll get delegates who will basically do the bidding of the legislature, perhaps the governor, perhaps other large business interests, and we're concerned that once the delegates go into the convention, they can pretty much do what they want to do, and we there are many issues that we think can be, if there's the political will to clean up Albany, it can be done through the conventional constitutional amendment process. If people are united enough by the League of Women Voters and other good government groups that we highly respect, this all can be done by individual constitutional amendments, where I feel we have a lot more input than we do in the Constitutional Convention.
So even if the intentions are good, you worry that they could tinker with things like Forever Wild, that in ways that
behind closed doors, there could be last-minute deals at the end of the convention that could strip away some of the protection that we've fought for since, for 100 years.
Yeah. Is that your biggest worry, John?
Well, that people will be given a choice to approve something that they really, really want, but also have to approve something they don't really want. So we may get, let's say, for example, some terrific reform in ethics on the state level, but a little tweak in the Forever Wild clause that makes it tougher to enforce, tougher to make sure that the preserve is there 100 years from now. I can't guarantee that people won't say, maybe that's worth it. And I think that ultimately we're concerned that business influences will have a great deal to say about this, and that advertising and political campaigning during the convention will have a huge influence on the delegates. And I don't think the environmental community can outspend the business community. It never has been able to before.
And Fred, you live with restrictions. You have talked about the unintended consequences.
Right.
But do you think the Constitutional Convention is the answer?
Oh, well, I think local government, we've discussed this at many of our meetings of the Local Government Review Board. I think we feel that this is sort of a test case with this land bank amendment we have for health and safety. If that's successful and it doesn't result in trades that are unacceptable, then I think local government is going to be willing to continue with that kind of process to resolve some of the other issues. But if it's not successful, and that story is going to be told in the next year, then I think they'll seriously consider the Constitutional Convention as being the only means to get the health and safety reforms and some other reforms that we think are needed. A couple of examples are that we now have litigation over what's timber. You know, we have allegations that it's includes seedlings and saplings, and you look at the dictionary definition of timber, and it's trees that can be sawn into dimensional lumber, which doesn't include seedlings and saplings, and that can have a big impact on whether you can build snowmobile trails where they're needed, which is the lifeblood of our winter economy. One of the things that I've got a big concern about is invasive species, that if we have terrestrial invasive species that get into the forest preserve, there's some species like the Asian longhorn beetle that the only way to control them is to cut the trees down and chip them up. You know, will that be allowed, or will it not be allowed? So those are additional issues, and there's many more that we feel should be addressed. And it's a good question whether it's going to be done through the legislative process, or whether it will take a more nuclear option of a constitutional
Whether it's done by
convention.
amendment,
Right.
or whether it has to,
Right.
like you said,
Exactly.
a nuclear
Yeah.
option.
Right.